Hi, everyone, and welcome. We're so glad that you're here to join us for Face Masks and Offer Letters Starting a New Job During a Pandemic. I'm Jennifer Regala, and joining me today are Amy Green and Michelle English. I'm delighted that they're here with me, and they'll be introducing themselves in just one moment. But before we get started, just wanted to share a bit of background about why we're having this session today. So, Amy and Michelle and I all started a new job during a pandemic, and we're just having conversations around this topic, how it was just a completely unique and different experience, a little bit daunting, a little bit scary, how it has ended up turning out well for us. But also, what does that look like? And also now at this point, it's not that unusual. And I think that a lot of best practices and a lot of the ideals that went into the training that each of us received during our first year of starting these new roles, how these will translate into future training and onboarding experiences of others in the editorial world. So, with that being said, I'm going to allow my co speakers to introduce themselves and just really look forward to your questions and your comments. And just wanted to let everyone know, too, that we really do want this to be a conversation. We're really looking forward to the Q&A and look forward to any questions that you might have. So, with that, Michelle, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks. So I am Michelle English. I'm the executive editor at the American Society of Civil Engineers. And what that means is I have sort of general oversight of the editorial operations of our society's 34 journals, all within the engineering disciplines. I've been working in publishing for about 12 years now, and I attended my first ISMT conference in 2011. I'm also the co-chair of the Career Development Committee for the Society of Scholarly Publishing, and I am the current vice president of ISMTE. And I would just like to plug that we have board applications still open. They're open for another week, I believe. So if you're interested in volunteering for the society, it's an awesome experience, and please do so.
Thanks, Michelle. Amy.
Yes, so I am the editorial coordinator at the American Society for Clinical Pharmacology and Therapeutics. I oversee the editorial processes for their 3 journals. I've been in scholarly publishing for about 14 years, and I've made use of lots of the ISMT resources over the years, and I currently have been chairing the membership committee for ISMT for the past 3 years.
Thanks, Amy. And I'm Jennifer Regala. I'm the Director of Publications at the American Urological Association. I oversee the publication of 2 scholarly journals, a newsletter, and a CME product. I've worked in scholarly publications for quite a long time. Let's just say that I'm getting up on that older age bracket. And I am, just to put in an ISMTE plug here, love ISMTE and the resources it offers. I often send my staff to ISMTE to look for tools and resources. Honestly, the best in the business, really well done. And I co-chair the membership committee with Amy. And so the one plug I'd like to make today is we are looking for members of our committee. We're a lot of fun, and we meet once a month and would love to have as many of you as would like to join us. The more the merrier. So thank you. And with that, we will dive right into our conversation here. So just wanted to get an idea of, what made all of us consider starting a new job during this scary, often terrible time, tumultuous, with all of that going on in the world. Just really curious, why did we do this? Like, why would any of us, do this right after, such an upheaval in the world? So would love if you would kick us off, Michelle.
Okay, so for me, so I started my position at ASCE in August of 2020. So it was sort of right in the thick of things with the pandemic. And not that we're out of the pandemic yet, but at the time that I was starting to look for jobs, basically what had happened was my husband was on the academic job market, applying to be a professor sort of widely across the country, and had been interviewing at various institutions across the US. So the seed had already been planted in my mind that, coming up within the next year or so, like things really were going to need to change for me. And right sort of as he started getting job offers, the pandemic also started. And so that's sort of what launched me into realizing like, well, I think it'll be easier for me to find a new job when I'm already working versus waiting until I finish out my time at my previous employer and then sort of looking. So I started to put my feelers out that way. I feel like oddly, the pandemic made it easier for me to find a job because I think more employers were considering remote workers at that point. And because of the fact that I wasn't sure where we were going to be moving to and living, it made me sort of reconfigure in my head what I wanted to do, because prior to the pandemic, I had sort of been fully in the office every day.
Wow, that's a lot of changes all at once. How about you, Amy?
So for me, I had worked at my previous job for over 10 years. I loved it. But in 2019, I decided I was ready to seek more professional growth and movement than the employer at the time could really provide me. While I enjoyed my job and the people I worked with, I wanted to expand my skill set, and there just simply were not any open positions at the company that would further my career in the direction that I really wanted. I began casually searching through job listings within the scholarly publishing community, but many of them were requiring relocation, which just really was not an option for me. Once employers began posting openings again after the pandemic began, I also noticed an uptick in remote positions, just like Michelle did. And honestly, the seclusion that the pandemic forced all of us into, while no one really loved it, it gave me that necessary quiet time and focus and ability that you really need to put all of yourself into searching for a new job.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. I agree with all of that. In my case, I wasn't looking for a job at all. I really loved my previous job. I had been there for over 2 years, but also they had been a longtime customer of mine for almost 20 years. So it was an organization that I knew well. I loved the people. I really loved the members, authors, editors, reviewers. The whole community was just so warm and honestly almost like a family. It was just a really great environment. So why would I look for a job? Well, there was this one opportunity that ended up in my inbox. This opportunity, just this one opportunity. And I'm like, I could do that. And also I don't see this trajectory for myself at this current position. It was a smaller organization. I was in my role and that's what it was. And it was so scary to leave. But honestly, everything was so scary at that point in time. I was like, hey, why not? So the interview process started April 2020. I started here in June of 2020. And honestly thought that I would be in the office by last summer. And we all know that didn't happen. Things like Michelle said, things are continuing on. But I went to that first interview. I liked what I heard. I loved the people asking me the questions. I loved what the job opportunity was. I loved the idea of growth within the organization. And it was a bigger organization with more support just by virtue of its large size. And honestly, it's closer to my home as well for when we do open back up full time. And we'll be talking about all of that in just a little bit here. So, moving on to the next question, I'm just curious for both of you, what did the interview process look like for you? Amy, do you mind taking this one first?
Sure. So obviously everything had to be done remotely. There was no traveling or anything, nothing in person. I applied online, and then all the correspondence was done through email. Both my initial interview and the follow-up interview were conducted over Zoom. It was odd not to drive or fly somewhere, or be able to shake hands with anyone, especially a new employer. But I could at least be comfortable in my own home doing it. Let's not downplay the significance of swapping those uncomfortable business shoes for your cozy slippers during the interview. So that was nice. When I finally received word that I got in the position, the rest of the remote process went very smoothly as well. And I know that we'll be diving into that later too.
Yes, mine, of course, too, was a fully remote experience, a traditional phone screen. So that was natural compared with things I've known in the past. But then I had an in-depth, hours-long screen, face-to-face interview that just was really long, but it was surprisingly just so warm and connecting. It turned out just as well as it possibly could in a virtual setting. It would have been nice to be sitting there in person, but also it was nice to wear cozy pants with a really cute top and only have to worry about the waist up. I will say that was a nice feature. My interview, that one that lasted for many hours, was with my supervisor, with members of my team who would be reporting to me if I was selected for the job, and then with other individuals from across the organization who would work closely with me. And I was surprised at how well we all vibed, despite never having seen each other before and being on a screen. So that ended up being a really good connection point. I did kick my kids, my husband, and my dog out of the house, safely, but they were all out of the house. So I did not have any background distractions, because in the pandemic with everyone doing school and work, I think they just got in the car and drove around forever. That was about the only safe thing to do. I made sure that I was on the call first. I got there early. I was sitting there waiting. I wanted to be the person waiting, rather than anyone waiting on me. And just before the interview, I did my homework. And I will say one thing that is kind of nice, you can kind of have all your cheat sheets and an extra screen and all of that stuff lined up for the interview that you couldn't have, right there, if you were in an office setting. And that was really nice because I had numbers, I had, impact factor, things like that I could refer to easily. And also it was really easy to ask my questions because I had them all written down. And then I could just really, ask these questions, and they sounded more intelligent, I think, than they would have if I had been in the office and been like, "Ooh, what was that question I was going to ask?" instead of just staring at a notebook. And then, if I just asked my question that I always love to ask, do you have any concerns about me as a candidate that I can address today? I just made sure to ask that. That translates well, no matter what, whether you're, in office or whether you're, on a screen. And by the end of the interview, I knew that I wanted the job, which I couldn't believe because I loved I couldn't believe that I was there, but then I ended up loving it and I knew that I wanted it. So that's how it all panned out for me. It turned out to be a really great experience. Again, I doubt I would have done anything like that had the pandemic not happened, though. Michelle, what about you? What was the interview process like?
Yeah, I love what you said about like being able to have all of those cheats up and everything. That's really, I found that to be helpful too. Prior to interviewing with ASCE, where I am now, I did a couple of just sort of informational interviews to sort of, learn about different positions with people. And I took that opportunity to sort of like do a little bit of a landscape survey for myself of like, okay, what else is out there? What do I want to do? Like I had been in my previous job for about 10 years as well. And so it's hard to sort of, move on for sure, especially when I loved that job and loved my coworkers and that sort of thing. But my application process was was pretty standard, although everything also was online. I applied online. I had, a series of HR types of calls, a video interview, and then a panel interview. But it was a little bit like sort of harried and stressful for me just because of the timeline of when those things lined up. Like in one of the interviews, I was amid boxes at my home in North Carolina. Like we were ready to hit the road to move to our new location. And then my next interviews were while I was on the road. And then lastly, my panel interview was when I was settled into my new home in Utah, also amid boxes on the other end of things, unpacking. So, I got to find where I put my, nice blouse and that sort of thing. What box is that in? But everything came together really smoothly. They shipped me my work laptop the Friday before I started. My first day on the job was just video calls with HR and IT to sort of get set up and onboarded and that sort of thing. And I think I was one of the very first or few new hires during the pandemic, and somebody that was going to be sort of fully remote, not like remote for now, going into the office later, because our headquarters are in Reston, Virginia, and I live in Utah. So it was a really interesting sort of proof of concept, I think, for the organization.
That's really interesting. And just to pull us into a question really quickly that we're getting from the audience. And I think this is a great question and it really connects with what you're saying, Michelle. What was the biggest challenge when interviewing from home? I think you touched on that a bit, but this person asking the questions also states, working from another state, do you feel that you have connected with your coworkers in the same aspect of being in the office? So would love your thoughts first, Michelle, and then Amy.
Yeah, I feel like my biggest challenge kind of in the beginning was just getting my bearings. Like I, had everything lined up really well. Like I only had a couple weeks between one job and another and moved pretty much all the way across the country. So that was just sort of a life circumstance for me. So just sort of feeling like I had my bearings there. But I feel like, getting to know my coworkers has gone pretty well. And also the only challenge is I'm in a different time zone now. So I constantly have to do that math. So that's just one sort of minor thing.
How about you, Amy?
Connecting with coworkers, I think, I know we'll go into it later. We do a really good job of staying connected in a lot of different ways. Of course, I speak with the people that I work directly with in my department more. But I really feel like the virtual setting helps prevent some of that office clickiness that you can get when you're in person all the time. It just really helped kind of everyone come together more as one. I see a lot less clickiness there with that. So yeah, I feel like I've still been able to connect with coworkers and things just about the same.
Oh my gosh, that is really interesting because I hadn't even thought about the clickiness, but I think you're absolutely 1000% right because clickiness is just a part of an in-person experience. It's a much more even playing field, in my opinion. So I really think that's a great point. So again, on to another topic here, but what has worked well for all of us? I think in my case, I did telecommute for many years. I've telecommuted in one way or another actually since the year 2000. So I do, I have an idea of what works and what doesn't. I will say though, it's a different feeling when you have no choice but to telecommute because there's a scary, scary upside down world situation as opposed to, telecommuting because my employer is willing to let me do it and I want to do it. So that's a difference, but having that experience was helpful. I'll also say that I went to with my new employer, every single coffee, happy hour, optional social event, no matter what it was. If there was an event like that, I went and I showed up and I made sure that I was asking people questions and getting to learn more about people. And just finding those connections as best as I could. Like I said, my office does happen to be local, so I was able to, interestingly, found some connections. There is one gal who works closely with me, and we went to high school together. There was a fellow colleague. It turns out he and I had played together as infants. Our moms were friends on the playground. So, just trying to make connections wherever possible. And then I think the really important thing too is I did ask my boss early on to have weekly one-on-one check-ins. And then I have asked my team to do the same with me. Even if we don't take the full amount of time we have scheduled for that, just making sure that we have that connection, in your face type of connections. And I just make sure I always tell everyone on my team, this is a safe spot, unless, I'm like a lawyer or a priest, unless you have, an illegal crime you've committed, you can talk to me safely and we won't take any action on what you're saying to me unless, it needs to be taken and we agree on that together. And I think remotely, to your point, Amy, again, about the remote situation, I think people are a little more willing to share than being in an office and having that chance of being overheard or leaving someone's office, looking excited or sad or mad or whatever the emotion is. I think it's a more private situation. So I think that lends itself well. And I had an onboarding buddy too, someone who had the same title as me, but he works in an entirely different department and intentionally was not going to be someone that I worked with a lot. And that was really interesting because it gave me, so to this day, I'll still reach out to him and ask him organizational questions, not really anything about my job, but more like, tell me, what does the AUA think about this or that or the other thing? And then as the world opened up a little bit too, just, finding that time to have some outdoor gatherings and, lunches and, doing things outside and at a distance when the weather allows. And at this point, our office is open voluntarily. And so being the extrovert that I am, I ran in there. We don't have to be there, but it's nice to, have the chance to go in when able. But it's also, as an extrovert, nice to be home too. So I'm not, talking too much and getting all my stuff done. It's kind of a nice mix. So curious about your thoughts, because again, I know you don't have that office to run to, Michelle. You don't have that same exact situation. Would love to know what's worked well for you.
Yeah, so I will say, like, my onboarding was super well organized. And I think that is like the gold standard for being able to make something like this work, for sure. So on my first day, I was assigned basically like a mentor buddy of somebody that was in my overall division, but not on my immediate team. So I was able to sort of have somebody I could ask questions to and just like develop a nice personal relationship with. That went really well. I also didn't have any technology issues for when I started. And I think that's so important, right? Like, if you are struggling to get your printer hooked up, or if you can't get into your Outlook or something's wonky, like, I think that really sets things off on the wrong foot. So just kudos to, our IT team at ASCE. Like, I know that that's like one of those things that you don't like feel appreciative of unless, something went wrong and they fixed it, but things went really well from the get-go for me. So I think that was good. The person that I was replacing was going to be retiring. So that's why the position became open. And we had about 3 weeks of overlap, and that was awesome because we met on a really regular schedule. She had sort of like structured things that we'd be talking about each day, based on the job description. And then she set up a series of meet and greets for me, sort of first within my immediate team, and then like broadly within our pubs department. And then sort of the circle got wider, throughout the whole organization. And these meet and greets lasted for months, far longer than she ended up, being there until she retired. But I thought it was great because, we were talking about before, like, you don't get to, knock on somebody's door and meet them. So even though these were like sort of pre-planned meet and greets, a little cheesy, hi, I'm Michelle, like I think it was still really good. And I got to have that FaceTime with folks. So, sort of long-term wise about what's been successful. We've had pubs happy hours, our pubs division. That's been really fun. I established time to meet with my people, one-on-one on a regular basis. Some people I meet with every week, some people every other week, that sort of thing. We also have a weekly team meeting where we kind of go over the state of the union for our department and just kind of how everything's going. We bounce ideas off of each other, and it's just a good time to connect and, just kind of see how everybody's week is going. I really appreciate that, like within my organization, there's an infrastructure that's already built in for informal get-togethers that aren't like super work related, but are sort of still within the professional, realm. So we have like an internal TEDx that goes on. We have lunch and learns. We have a diversity and inclusion committee that puts on cool events. Like, we'll watch a 15-minute video and then talk about it, or we'll have an external speaker come in. Those have been really good ways to get to know people and kind of learn more company culture types of stuff. I also signed up to have a mentor at ASCE. There's sort of like a internal mentorship program, and that's been really helpful for me for my own professional development, but also somebody that I can ask questions like what you were saying, Jennifer, like what does the organization think about this? So that's been really helpful as well. So yeah, those are just some things from me.
Love it. I love hearing about how it worked for you guys. What about you, Amy?
Yeah, so my experience was very similar to Michelle's, and very organized. That's very important. I think in a virtual environment, organization is a super high priority, and my company, fortunately, they excel at that. They are very organized. To help the remote experience feel more personal, I also met through Zoom with each of the other 11 members of our staff. They all greeted me very warmly. They gave me an overview of what each of them do for the company, kind of what their day-to-day looks like. It did not have to go on for too many months like Michelle's, but I did get to meet individually with each one. And I just don't think that would happen in real life, to go knock on each door, force yourself to speak for, 15 minutes, 20 minutes to each person. It just really helped me, get to know a little bit about each person. They could each tell you a little something about the company, maybe a little tidbit to help you and things like that. So I really enjoyed that part of it. If I just look at those first 2 weeks, and then more broadly over the past year, there are still several other items that I wanted to note. For our weekly staff meetings, as well as smaller department meetings and editorial meetings, we're required to be on video. So I really like that. It's not just having your microphone on or off. We're required to be on video. It helps me remain engaged, and I feel like it also helps encourage conversation with everyone. Also, not everything has worked. Only worked through Zoom. I can speak with my team through Skype, whether that be questions or reminders or the occasional jokes or memes, just to help things, not always be so serious and have a good laugh each day. Perhaps the most helpful thing we do at the end of each week is to report our top 2 successes and challenges to our supervisors. It's a helpful way to keep everyone in the know from afar, but it also forces us to plan each week with achievable goals and actions. So I really like that part. And lastly, I would say the company's been very supportive of, what is everyone going through during this, time that none of us has been through before. What do we need? Take some time for yourself. Do you need to go for a walk in the middle of the day and things like that? So that's been very helpful, just to have a supportive company during different time for all of us.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And also there's no situation that a funny meme can't fix. I like that you pointed out memes for sure, and definitely a supportive company and that messaging, like you're valuable, you're important. I see what you're going through. That's key. Just a quick pause. I'd love to ask a question from the audience. And get your thoughts on this. Any advice for employers who are hiring remotely? Anything your particular hiring process did that made you feel very comfortable, or interestingly, vice versa? Anything that didn't feel that great? And have you heard from any of your colleagues who have joined new organizations during COVID on the same question? Amy, I'll just go right back to you. What are your thoughts?
Gosh. So I would say advice for employers that are trying to hire remotely. Again, I'll just reiterate organization. I really don't think that it would be the easiest thing for either side to do, whether it be the person doing the hiring or the person being hired. Just knowing kind of that layout, what's expected of you. Having really good documentation. I really liked that, I knew what was expected of me during those first 90 days. There was a schedule there. Just to have it laid out for the person, that was very, very helpful. If the question is more to the actual interview and hiring side of it, I would say just communication, just making sure to answer the emails. Let them know what's expected of them for the Zoom meeting, if they needed to bring anything, any questions, things like that. So that would be my advice there.
What are your thoughts, Michelle?
Yeah, one just minor thing that was really helpful is part of the interview process for me was a panel interview. The HR people told me who was going to be on the panel interview and what their job titles were, and that helped me sort of contextualize who I'd be talking to, and it allowed me to develop some questions ahead of time for those people, because it was sort of my opportunity to ask broader questions about the publications department at ASCE. And then I guess like my other piece of advice is like, I think in a fully remote setting, it's really important, I think, once somebody started and you're onboarding them, to like sort of talk them through like the intangible things that if you were in the office, you'd sort of get a sense of easier. Like an example is I went to, this was maybe a month into working, put in a PTO day. And I wasn't super sure how to do that, but I saw on our time tracking software that you could submit a PTO request. So I put my PTO request in, and there was like a little comments box. So I put in, I am submitting this PTO request because October 30th is my birthday and I would like to take it out. Like, so I went like, apparently very overboard. And I was told later sort of like, oh, you don't need to do that. Just take the day off and, put it on the calendar. It's fine. And so just like sort of little things like that, I think are going to be harder as more and more companies like kind of switch to having hybrid or, fully remote people. Like you just kind of need to let them know those expectations. And certainly somebody will eventually end up figuring it out and it'll become normal to them. But I went from like sort of a very rigorous time tracking system in my previous position where every hour needed to be accounted for to like, just put your 8 hours in and, whatever. So I think it's, that can be something that could be a little bit of a challenge, but also an opportunity to make somebody feel like they know what they're doing.
Totally. I totally agree with all of that. My boss loves to say, let's be right and tight here. So definitely in the interview process, be right and tight, have questions prepared, be ready. And then when you pick the person you're going to hire, have the documentation, to Amy's point, have a plan, have it all planned out. Because again, this is a nervous and scary time to begin with. So why add to that drama? Make it a safe spot and make someone glad that they've, decided to take this leap of faith. I do want to do a quick chime check. It's already 2:04, ladies. We were worried about filling up our allotted time, and I think we will more than do that. So moving on, just curious what some, we've been talking mostly about the good things, but what about some of the challenges? What have those looked like for you? Michelle, do you mind kicking us off on this one?
Yeah. So I think, we're talking about changing jobs in a pandemic. It was so hard for me to leave my previous job during the pandemic. Like, we went fully virtual right in, the beginning of March, basically. And that was the last time I saw my coworkers in person. And that's sad. It's so anticlimactic to like leave a position that you've been in for a decade and not get to have that proper goodbye and that feeling of closure. So that's something that I feel like I'm still processing. But, moving, more positively, I think starting a new position, it's been just like a little bit harder, I think, or maybe just not as quick to build those new relationships with my new coworkers because, you're not having those face-to-face interactions. And I think I'm definitely one of those people that, I like to see the cues from people, the body language, et cetera. And so, just having to work a little bit harder in a virtual environment to get to know people, having opportunities for social interaction without it feeling super contrived, recognizing on one hand, Zoom fatigue, obviously it's super real. But if you don't make time at the top of a meeting to say, hey, how's it going? How's your week? Like, you're not going to be able to get to know your coworkers, basically. So you need to strike that balance. And, just with that, like, how am I to know, unless we have our cameras on and are having informal conversations, like if one of my coworkers is having a bad day or something's going on at home? That was a lot easier to know in the office because it kind of would come up naturally, or you could sense that something was off. And so that is a little bit of something that I worry about, is like, how can I support everybody in this new environment? Obviously, I'm sure we all have Zoom fatigue stories. I'm sort of on calls and on video, sometimes up to 6 hours a day, but then often I'll have days where I don't really have any calls. So I think that's it's important to plan for that, to take good care of yourself. I have like this new sort of policy that I'm trying out, where if I'm attending just like a listening only meeting, I will do it on my phone and I'll put my earbuds in and I'll go take a walk and listen to the meeting, like a webinar or something. So yeah.
That's really good advice. And that was so hard, the not saying goodbye. And I still have like really weird feelings about that and a lot of sadness, because I loved every person in my old job, and didn't really properly say goodbye. They gave me a goodbye party and they all showed up wearing hot pink because that's my favorite color. But past that, there was no hugs. There was no real goodbye. And that still really hurts thinking about it. Actually, we hadn't even talked about that in planning this event, but that's, a big thing that it's hard to give that up. The Zoom fatigue for sure. Oh my goodness. My eyes sometimes, even talking about it makes my eyes feel heavy. Also a challenge for me has been not understanding how things in the actual office work. Now that we're going back a little bit, like, how do I reserve a meeting room? How do I make the projector thingy come down from the ceiling, like stuff like that. I don't know where, like, what's in the vending machine. Are my gummy bears in there? Do they have like my favorite red Coca-Cola cans in the Coke machine? I don't know. So figuring all those things out, and then also just doing my job, implementing efficiencies and getting people to believe in me and want to work with me, and really getting that, like, let's link up arms and get this done. And everyone's like, well, who are you? I don't know you from, I've never, that type of thing. Although everyone has been amazing. So that really was not that valid of a worry. And then just finding work people. How you always just have your work people, those people that you can just be you with. That was hard. It's happened now, but it takes more time when you're not there, and bumping into each other, buying your Red Coke and your gummy bears in the vending machine. It takes a little bit more effort. What about you, Amy? What are your thoughts?
I think my biggest challenges was in the beginning. I would say it was very tough having interviews on Zoom instead of real life. I'm an outgoing person, and though I'm an outgoing person and friendly by nature, learning to exude those qualities on a computer screen was a big challenge. Increasing my comfort level on screen and learning those nuances of a virtual meeting. There's skill sets to be learned. And even after gaining comfort in that area, and with the pandemic in full swing, another Zoom meeting was really the last thing that I craved at the time. I wanted the chance to go to lunch with my colleagues or a celebratory beer after a successful day, anything like that. So I think that was just tough getting used to Zoom. We're all getting there now, but that was the challenge in the beginning for me.
So our time is actually running short, and this is not, I'm just going to throw a question out there that's not on our, not in our preparation that we talked about, but something that's just coming to my own mind, because I know that there's people watching and people have actually spoken with me about it. And I know that's how all of us came to talk about this and form this session is what would be your biggest tip for making this work? And, what would be the biggest cheerleading, encouraging thing that you could tell someone who finds himself in the situation where we were a year ago? And what's your best advice? Michelle, do you mind taking that surprise question?
Sure. So I think the biggest thing that I think is going to be in a company's favor for hiring someone new is get those documentation and protocols in line, have everything organized and ready to go. I know we've all sort of championed that idea. But my advice to people would just be go for it. Like, times are changing. Companies are open to all sorts of different arrangements now. It is the Wild West again for workers. So give it a try, and, don't be afraid to reach out to your community, people at ISMTE, you've got a lot more connections than you think you might. I know I reached out to tons of people that I knew in the industry. I let them know that I'd be leaving and to let me know if anything came across their desks that sounded like something that I might be interested in. So, use your professional connections.
That's great advice. What about you, Amy?
I would say one thing that we haven't said, of course, is just if you can, if your space allows, try to have a dedicated space for an office. It'll just help you focus. Try to have a schedule and things like that. That would be my advice to the person trying to go remote. Of course, yes, just take that shot and do it. Just take the chance. And yes, if you can, just try to have a space, a quiet spot, and a schedule.
I agree with that advice wholeheartedly, about the space. And my biggest advice would be too, if you see an opportunity that is of interest, it doesn't hurt to take a look at that. You should always be thinking about your own relevance and where you fit into the world at large. I think that's something that we're really good in the scholarly publishing community about doing, is connecting the dots and being very welcoming of our peers and one another, and being kind and reaching out. So just absolutely, do that. And also just don't forget, if that organization's interviewing you, and then if they hire you, they want you there. So don't forget that. Don't forget how worthy and amazing you are. If you're, getting that job in these kind of circumstances, good for you. And you're wanted and you're needed in that role. And then also don't forget to go to the ISMTE resources and check back in if there's questions that you have, because I can tell you I use them all the time myself and send my team to them as well. So with that, I have to thank both of you so much. This conversation's been so great, and all of the conversations that we've had leading up to this. And not to speak for Amy and Michelle, but I do feel good in saying that I think they'd be willing to answer any questions all of you might have, because I know that I sure am. And also, I hope to see all of you out and about during the meeting. There's different opportunities for networking and connection, and I hope that you all take advantage of all of the above. So thanks everyone for your time today, and have a great rest of your meeting.
Thank you, Jennifer.
you.
Thank you.